Hello everybody, and welcome to Theology 101. Today we are going to look at the rapture versus the return of Christ. The word rapture comes from the Latin translation of the Greek word caught up. This phrase refers to 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 17. Then we who are alive, who are left, will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so we will always be with the Lord. So we see that the Apostle Paul is talking about a future event where Christians will be caught up with Jesus in the air. This event has been called the rapture. So the rapture of the church is when believers are caught up with Jesus before God judges the rest of the world during the 7-year tribulation period. Then after the 7-year tribulation period, Jesus will then return to earth to rule in the millennial kingdom. Another passage that seems to refer to the rapture event is 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 51 to 54. Behold, I tell you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet. For the trumpet will sound, and the dead will be raised imperishable, and we shall be changed. For this perishable body must put on the imperishable, and this mortal body must put on immortality. Based on this passage, God will resurrect all believers who have died, give them glorified bodies, and he will also snatch up living believers and transform their bodies into glorified bodies at the same time. The purpose of this transformation is because our current bodies are tainted with sin, and in order to be in the presence of God, we need to have a new body without sin. Now, not all Christians believe in a rapture event. In fact, even those who believe in the rapture do not agree on the timing of the rapture. The first view is called the pre-tribulation rapture view. This view argues that the rapture occurs before the 7-year tribulation period, implying that the church will not experience God's judgment on earth. The second view is called the mid-tribulation rapture view. This view argues that the rapture will occur midway through the 7-year tribulation period. Although the church will experience part of the tribulation period, they will escape the great tribulation, which is when the Antichrist will torment the world during the last 3.5 years of the 7-year tribulation period. The third view is called the pre-wrath rapture view. This view argues that the church will be taken up about 3/4 of the way through the tribulation period. This means that the church will experience most of the 7-year tribulation period, but will be rescued from the most intense part of God's wrath on earth. The final view is called the post-tribulation rapture view. This view argues that the rapture event is synonymous with the second coming of Christ and will occur after the 7-year tribulation period. In other words, this view does not believe that there will be a rapture event. So, is there a rapture event that is separate from the second coming of Jesus? Well, it depends on how you interpret 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 and 1 Corinthians chapter 15. Those who argue for the rapture event say that these passages have different details than other passages that describe the return of Christ, while those who don't believe in a separate rapture event say that all these passages describe the same event. For example, in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 verse 17, it says that believers will be caught up in the air to meet Jesus, while Revelation chapter 19 describes Jesus returning to earth with believers. 1 Corinthians chapter 15 verses 50 to 54 describes this event as a mystery, whereas the second coming of Christ is visible to all people and not a mystery. Paul argues that the event in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 is imminent and could happen anytime, while he states in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 verse 4 that certain events must take place before the second coming of Christ. So based on these differences, some Christians believe in a separate rapture event from the second coming of Christ. Now, one passage that needs to be looked at closely is Jesus' Olivet Discourse. This is where he gives extensive details regarding his second coming. So it is necessary to see if the details from the Olivet Discourse matches with the details given in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, which supposedly supports a rapture event. Initially, we see that there are a lot of similarities between the Olivet Discourse and 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. Both passages describe Jesus coming to earth. Both passages mention Jesus coming in the clouds. Both passages mention angels accompanying Jesus. And both passages say that God's people will be gathered. So it seems pretty settled. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 is describing the second coming of Jesus and not the rapture event, right? Hold on. Let's take a little closer look. Let's look at the context of the Olivet Discourse versus 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. In the Olivet Discourse, Jesus has spoken to the Pharisees concerning judgment. This can be seen in the woe statements in Matthew chapter 24. As Jesus was leaving the temple with his disciples, he tells them that not one stone of the temple will be left, implying the future destruction of the Jewish temple. This prophecy was fulfilled in AD 70 when the Romans destroyed Jerusalem. Now, this prophecy piqued his disciples' curiosity, so they followed up with this question. As he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, "Tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?" What follows is Matthew chapter 24 to 25, where Jesus describes the future destruction of the temple in 70 AD and also describes the future events that will take place during the 7-year tribulation period before he returns to earth. During that time, God will discipline the nation of Israel and judge the entire world as described later in Revelation chapter 6 to 19. The context for 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, however, is very different than the Olivet Discourse. Paul is responding to a church that does not believe in the future resurrection of Christians, thus he encourages them to wait with hope for a future resurrection of all believers. Considering these different contexts, we see different tones between Jesus and Paul. Jesus commands his disciples to be watchful and to see the coming signs of the second coming of Jesus, while Paul has a sense of urgency when explaining the future resurrection of the dead and the living believers who will be ascended with Christ in the clouds. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, Paul presents the resurrection as a foundation for those who have died to be reunited with glorified bodies along with living believers. However, in the Olivet Discourse, Jesus does not mention believers being caught up in the air with his return, but focuses on the Jews who will be scattered around the world and will suffer through the Great Tribulation. The context of the Olivet Discourse is the future judgment of Israel, while the context for 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 is the future salvation of the church. We see that Jesus will gather the believers from all around the world to one place when he returns, while Paul describes dead believers and living believers being caught up in the air to meet Jesus. Finally, we see in the Olivet Discourse that Jesus will send out his angels with a loud trumpet to gather believers together, while Paul describes an archangel and a loud shout initiating the resurrection of all believers. So if you think these differences are significant enough to say that Paul is describing a different event than Jesus, then you will believe in a rapture. However, if you think that these differences are insignificant and that Paul is describing the second coming of Christ, then you will probably not believe in a rapture. It all depends on how you understand 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 and the Olivet Discourse. Thank you to today's sponsor, Awe and Reverence. They offer a free digital worship music app called Maskill. If you want to find out more, I'll leave some links below in the description box. If you missed the last video about the Great Tribulation, I'll leave a link here for you to watch. Until next time, see you!